Uh, we'll now take your questions, but may I request you to keep them brief. So remember, it's a question, not a comment. Please first introduce yourself. So we would like to know your name, where you are from, and followed by the question. So if you raise your hand if you have a question, then Mr. Madhusudan over here. Yeah, please be brief so that we can have more questions.
Good afternoon, Professor. I am Srivas. I am a doctoral student at Indian Institute of Management, Kozhikode itself. My question draws from your point on how the markets are not able to be compensating for the destruction which the environment is being faced with. So, if you see the Western world, there are a lot of tools which have been recently developed to measure the extent of environmental effects on a lot of things. So my question is, why aren't these measures, say for example the social return on investment measure, why aren't these measures becoming popular in India? Is it a lack of will from the political class, or is it the lack of policy being not there to implement these measures?
Actually, even these instruments are not being implemented, I understand, in countries like United States. Joseph Stiglitz, who was chief of the Economic Advisory Council to President Clinton, in fact has, in a book called Price of Inequality, talked about how when he was heading this Economic Advisory Council, a number of such measures they tried to introduce and implement in the United States, but the very powerful coal lobby, he says in particular, made sure that these were set aside. Possibly, I think I'm not very familiar, countries like Germany or some of the Scandinavian countries, they may be implementing such measures. But I think Stiglitz also says, in United States we are supposed to have a one person, one vote democracy. There is unfortunately $1, one vote democracy. In India, I think it has perhaps takes a more extreme form of 1 rupee, one vote democracy, whatever it is. Certainly the economic disparities in India are even greater than in the United States. And possibly it is these interests which don't allow this to happen. But yes, I agree, with these technical policy measures are also very relevant.
Okay, we have a question.
Good afternoon, sir. This is Gomati, PGP student from the same institute. Sir, you talked about the Forest Rights Act, how it has helped some tribal communities to manage their own resources. So for the past couple of days, we've been reading that the government of the day might do a revert back on this policy, and the Forest Rights Act 2006 might be diluted. So don't you think this was a good policy, and how can we possibly fight this?
See this, where these people in Gadchiroli are managing are also very rich coal beds, and that is the issue. So the government, present day government, in making their development a Janandolan, would perhaps make their development a whatever coal lobby Andolan. I do not know. I mean, that may be why they wish to revert, if that is true.
Question?
Thank you, sir, for coming here. It's a good opportunity to see you in person. So your faculty of patience and expertise. But the sad fact is, you're so much emotional about all the things.
Sorry, could you introduce yourself first, please?
Oh yeah, so sorry. Yeah, so I'm Binu Jose. I'm a local here and involved in some activities in the Western Ghats and some environmental activities as such. Yeah, thanks for coming here and a good opportunity to be here. Yeah, there are a lot of questions to ask you. I don't know how to prioritize it. Continuing with what you had explained last about the Gram Sabhas and the power which is vested in the Gram Sabhas, let me ask you something from another perspective. As a Gram Sabha member, I want something to be implemented. And the proposed Western Ghats Development Authority on top of this, they can block it. how do you, that's essentially blocking my right, isn't it?
Now there is a lot of misunderstanding of this Western Ghat Ecology Authority. The government of India itself, in the mandate given to us, had said that they want to establish a Western Ghat authority, and all we were asked to do was to suggest how it should be constituted and function. So we had a limitation on our mandate. Within that mandate, if you look our recommendations, we have tried to make that authority as decentralized as possible and take away as little from your right as a member of the Gram Sabha as possible. But it was not part of our mandate to say that there shall be no such authority.
Okay, question. Sir, I'm Venkatesh from IN. My question is actually from your book. In that, you had said that in a feudal setup, the surpluses of the villages are accumulated and they go to the urban area to be traded. So the urban area is essentially accumulation of feudal surpluses. But in a capitalist economy where all the generation of surplus is not only through feudal accumulation but through say something like financial markets. How would you apply this model to explain the growth of large cities in the capitalist model?
I see, but let me explain. Whenever I have written such things, I have had co-authors like Ram Guha, who in fact had a equivalent of PhD, what you call, from IIM Kolkata. And many of these things I have depended on him. Now I am working with Amit Bhaduri. So many of these things I cannot fully, I'm not really competent to answer technical questions along these lines, but I'm sure, maybe at a different kind level of personal discussion we could go into it and I could try to understand, but I cannot immediately respond. I simply have to plead that I am not technically competent enough to answer a question of the type you have raised.
Sir, I am Latif from Calicut. I want to hear about the mining industry, sir. There are a lot of studies has taken during the past 1800 by Goldsmith regarding the goldsmith, regarding the gold in the Western Ghats. And our government also has studied a lot of studies about this. These are in the alluvial soil. Can we take all this due to your Gargill report, Gargill restriction and Kasturirangan restriction? Lot of plenty of golds are there in the Western Ghat, especially in Kerala. A lot of studies has taken place. So all these are being idle now. What is the solution? And even I am in the Molda mining, so quarry mining, and big people are mining in the EC region. Only small persons are restricted. Big mining is now also taking place.
Our report does not put very specific ultimate restrictions. We have made again and again clear that we are making a set of suggestions for various sectors, including mining, as a starting point for discussion, that these should be taken to all the Gram Sabhas of Western Ghats, all Ward Sabhas, and their considered feedback obtained, and through a proper democratic process, ultimate decision should be taken, which may say gold can be mined under certain conditions and so on. So it is not correct that we have given these kind of restrictions at all as any kind of final restrictions. Now people are not used to thinking democratically. They think everything government says is only to be thrust on their head. So in spite of the fact that in many places our saying again and again that we are against such imposition from above, people like good people like you are interpreting that we are imposing no gold mining from above. It is not part of our recommendation at all.
My name is Rajan. I belong to Calicut and I am the presently working as the General Secretary of the Prakriti Samrakshan Samiti. I have a question. Have you believed our report, the Madhav Gadkari report, would be implemented by the Modi government? Another question is that, is the judiciary is sufficient to ban the illegal mining? The common people are what to do to stop the illegal mining.
No, see, whether Modi government will accept our report or not, or whether judiciary is powerful enough to stop illegal mining or not, I really am in no better position than you to answer these questions.
To make it cute, two questions.
When we come back to you after we have heard from some others.
I am Musa Koyal, working as a teacher. Sir, to you, protest the environment is a necessary thing, and certain suggestion from your reports to stop the mining and all. And what are the alternatives for the field of construction?
As I said, these are the kinds of things that need to be worked out. I have seen now what is the objective of construction is something also perhaps one should examine. What is it that socially we are trying to encourage through construction? I have read a report that in Kerala, I forget the exact figure, maybe 11 lakh flats are unoccupied and 12 lakh people are homeless. So there is this kind of distortion of development. Certainly I know in Pune where I stay, which may be a similar situation, in the locality I stay, and I must confess it is a locality inhabited by fairly well-off people, 80% of the flats are purchased as long-term investment, speculative investment. And to construct all these flats, you can see how much of illegal quarrying has gone on around Pune, how much of illegal sand mining has gone on around Pune. All sorts of things are happening. So all these have to be examined. I have no answers immediately, but what is the purpose of all this construction? And if the purpose is to provide housing for people, is it providing? If it is not, then should it be allowed to continue, supported by so much illegal stone and environmentally destructive of water resources, quarrying and sand mining? These are things which people should look at.
My name is Ahmed. I am a farmer from Ramsey area. So you have this, in this Gandhi report discussed about tree cutting, timber. See, we normally grow timber. So in Kerala, we are allowed to cut the timber that we grow. So now that this restriction comes about, nobody is going to plant any timber, which is required for the regular use in the state. In fact, after this report was announced, people from Trivandrum to Kasaragod have cut all the timber about 2 feet, scared that they cannot cut it later on. And even rubber trees have been cut, saying that this cannot be cut when it's ready for replant. So this is what is happening in Kerala.
As I said, it is quite a remarkable how complete misinterpretation and misinformation can percolate. Because certainly I have in other places which I can show explicitly where we have discussed tree farming and so on, strongly recommended that farmers must be given incentive to grow timber and so on. So that is not the issue. But with our report, as I said, very explicitly again and again we say these recommendations are to be starting point for discussion and not to be taken as final. In so many words it is said in more than one place. So if the impression is conveyed that this report is implemented, no trees can be cut, it is not true. If this report is implemented, democracy shall prevail is true.
Any other questions? We can take.
See, while demarcating the areas as Western Ghats, you used a methodology of identifying it as the village boundaries. Village boundaries are basically administrative boundaries, and the state government can alter it whenever required. That's what my understanding is. See, we have GPS and other methods of identifying this. Why couldn't we use that? For example, when your zone comes in, the buffer zone comes in, the 10 kilometers. Actually, I am in the ninth kilometer from the Tirunelveli, which is again a red zone. So it was just the village boundary mapping which created this issues, wherein the population of the village is much above 1,000 per square kilometer, whereas you have a 150 or 200 mark which you generally followed.
I think you are confusing Kasturirangan Committee's report with our report. Seriously, I mean, what we have said is that we are not in the position, a small panel with no financial resources and limited time is not in a position to give specific full recommendations. We have said that watershed has to be taken into account. We do not have adequate information or time to suggest watershed-based boundaries. So we have said that very grossly, only at taluk level, we have suggested boundaries as a starting point. That now village by village, watershed by watershed, at the ground level, people must work out the details. That is explicitly said in our report. I think some of the statements you make, you picked up from Kasturirangan and mixed them up with our suggestions.
Let's also hear from others. Yeah.
Alasan Gutti, coming from Farouk College. I would like to know what is the conceptual and real difference between Madhav Gadgil report and Kasturirangan report.
Okay. To very quickly answer, there are two major differences. We have taken a comprehensive view of ecological endowments, and in particular, water resources are a very precious component of Western Ghats, and we should not be thinking only of particular forest vegetation, but water resource related issues must also be looked at, is one of the important points. On the other hand, Kasturirangan report classifies landscapes into cultural landscapes and natural landscapes. Their natural landscapes are essentially only forests and almost entirely reserve forest and wildlife sanctuaries, a little bit outside. So theirs is a restricted view, and in particular, the broader ecological endowment, they have completely ignored, making it part of cultural landscape. As I have said, we have a specific chapter or section saying that there are important biodiversity heritage sites like even small sarpa cows. I have seen sarpa cows in the midst of paddy field in thickly settled Kerala. Those are certainly part of cultural landscape. Now, Kasturirangan report will completely forget about all such things, whereas we make specific recommendations. In fact, we also say you should give positive incentives, conservation service charges for maintaining such sarpa cows and other things. So this is one thing. Second major difference is we recommend this proper democratic process, whereas Kasturirangan report has a specific statement saying that how can local communities have any role in economic decision making? So, which is a shocking statement. So, Dr. Kasturirangan says that you can make quarries, that's a big economic decision. You can thrust them on Chembangudi's people, they will have no say in it, which is to my mind actually unconstitutional. So theirs is an anti-democratic, unconstitutional report with a narrow vision. Ours is a constitutional, democratic report with a broad vision. That's the difference.
Any other questions? Okay, just one there and then we'll come to the front. Yeah, please go.
Sir, I am Shekhar from Calgate. About development, you told that Modi is of the opinion that Vikas हमको जन आंदोलन बनेगा, विकास के बारे में ऐसा कहता है. Similarly, even though there is no concrete suggestions or concrete things he has to produce, you say that it will remain as a simple rhetoric as so many rulers of our country has formulated many things earlier. So, what do you think when you suggest all these things in the present system, which is based on purely profit motive? Every production is based on profit motive. So in this system, any rulers will do like this. So scientists like you, when you suggest all these things, do you not think that this these things, these ideas, if it should be made into practice, it should be realistic, then we should have a system which is not based on profit motive. So what I mean to say is that all these scientific postulations and this whatever you suggest, it should be accompanied by some suggestions for social revolution, without which this sort of things cannot be realized. So what do you say about that?
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes. Firstly, I do not think in this world only profit motive rules. I am very interested in computers, and in fact that's part of my occupation also, to be thinking and working with them. And we have seen in last 15-20 years this whole open source software movement, or knowledge resources like Wikipedia, which have been produced by people without any profit motive. So some very significant activities can take place without profit motive, even in a society like United States, which may say profit is all that matters. Therefore, I do not believe that one can feel that overwhelmingly it is only profit, so things are hopeless. Secondly, for social revolution, the suggestions you are asking, I tried to formulate some. For example, the current practice of continually handing over public resources in private hands, we should stop. I made some suggestions along those lines for what they are worth. Thirdly, in terms of alternatives which one should practice, I also mentioned 2 examples where I am personally trying to work with and help, say, these community forest resource management groups or cow raise cooperative mining, which is what a single person like me can do. I cannot, I am by myself create any great social revolution, and unfortunately those social revolutions have in the past ended up also producing Stalins, so I have some doubts about them.
So my name is Bhaskaran Velu, coming from Kannur. I am the secretary of Zilla Parishad Samiti Kannur. It's not my question, but my anxiety is that I thought that after the talk of Gadgilji, so many questions coming from the students, researchers from there, because the new generation is not much awareness about our Western Ghats. If not Western Ghats, our country may accept. So the new generations now also thinks that the economy will control, all the things will control the market. So can make any bridge from the new generation. Gadgil ji talking to not Gadgil ji because he is around 80, I think. He will talk about the students and new generation. You protect the Western Ghats. You protect the two monsoons, our agriculture, our economy, all the things protect the Western Ghats. So why not the students or the new generation coming to talk about the Western Ghats to stop the illegal minings, quarries and all the things. And I think Gadgil ji instruct or say to the new generation students to come forward to protect or to talk about these Western Ghats.
Wonderful suggestion.
Thank you. I think Mrs. Hanu has a question.
I am Stanuvar Nair, working as a faculty here. As an alternative suggestion, you said the government should act as a trustee of public resources, which means they should not discriminately privatize public resources. But if you look at the practical side, that's what's happening. They are everywhere they are privatizing the public resources. My question is, in this context, what would you suggest to incentivize the governments to become more sensitive towards the environmental protection? So hardly I see any politician or government or a political leader who is talking in a positive manner in the sense of protecting environment. Everybody, it seems, is in the race to promote development or protect business interests at the cost of environment. So how to make the governments more responsible in terms of protecting environment?
I think really the issue is that ultimately, unless we have much more broad-based democracy, the current form of representative democracy, the people who get elected or maybe fail to get elected also, but try hard, they are all very much dependent on large amounts of money being available to them. So this money is dictating all their actions, and you may say, like has happened in Goa, the chief minister before being elected said very many things against the moneyed interests, and the moneyed interests no doubt knew that he is saying these things to win the elections, you should not worry about it. After getting elected, he is doing exactly the opposite. So this is the only answer seems to be, we must have a much more broad-based democracy, and if there is more and more devolution, perhaps this will slowly get diluted. But this is a serious problem, you are quite right.
Thank you. Two last questions, very briefly, please. I request you. We're running out of time.
My name is Shamshad. I'm from Malappuram district. UPS second introduced the Kasturirangan to study about the Madhav Gadgil report. And now you're saying that the Kasturirangan report is unconstitutional. And some facts you tell about it. But the Modi government going to implement the Kasturirangan report, and it is put forward the paper in front of the Green Tribunal. And I think that my question is, what people going to what people to believe what is telling government and what is telling Gadgil?
I'm not quite sure of the question. Well, people should believe, I'm sure Modi ji you should believe, because he can do what he wants, Gadgil can do nothing he wants.
I am Janardhanan from Calicut. I call myself as a social activist in my own way. Now, when the comparison was made between Kasturirangan report and some other report, you said, no? Have you thought about Mahatma Gandhi's Gram Swaraj? Had you it in your mind when you were dictating or writing or thinking about it, no? About Mahatma Gandhi's Gram Swaraj? Thank you.
Now, Mahatma Gandhi's Gram Swaraj in particular, as expressed in Hind Swaraj, I have carefully studied. I have serious doubts about that formulation, because that formulation cannot be used to provide any concrete answers. And this actually happened in a case of a dam being built by Tatas close to Pune. The problem was that with the connivance of the British government that time, this was 1916, the Tatas actually were forcibly, without compensation, taking away farmers' land for the project. And there was a major agitation. And those who were involved in that agitation, it was a very peaceful agitation, thought that Mahatma Gandhi just 7 years before that had written Hind Swaraj and had said that this peasant economy, these self-reliant villages, they should be the bedrock of India, that they should not be destroyed, that he will back their agitation. He did not. He backed Tatas. That agitation collapsed. People in Pune were very upset, and some of them were my relatives from my father's generation. And they said, this Gandhi talks of something and does something, and then he says, well, Tatas and Birlas are trustees of the nation and they will do what they want. So you read in Swaraj again, at least I read, I cannot find anything concrete. Towards the end, he also starts talking about trusteeship, this and that. No concrete thing you can get out of that.
Thank you, sir, for taking our questions and answering them with the patience. May I now request our Director in Charge, Professor Baluni, to give Professor Gadgil a token of our appreciation for his talk. I'll now request my colleague, Professor Matthew, to give the vote of thanks.
This is a difficult task because a mere thank you is not enough for Professor Madhav Gadgil. Much more than what he said today. He has been a great inspiration for many generations, not just of Ramachandra Guha, but many people have been influenced by his writings. I personally must thank him because when I was much younger, I have grown up on his writings, especially when Fisher Land came. And it was my wish that there are some people whom you must listen before you die, and Professor Gadgil was one of them. So thank you very much. I wish to thank the media sitting here for their patience and their continued cooperation with the IMK. Hopefully they are happy enough to come again and give us all the cooperation and coverage that we may request. I wish to thank every one of you sitting in the audience, especially also the team which organized this, Professor Rudra and his team at the RCP. All of them, we must thank them for, I don't know where they have gone suddenly. And, oh, there they are. I wish to thank the entire audience for having taken time off and come. We also expect everyone, hopefully in the future, to come and encourage us when we organize programs like this. I thank Professor Baluni for having presided over this function. I think it's his first function officially. Third one, sorry. So I thought this was the first and the best one. So thank you very much. Thank you all.